jump into Ink and Dagger, the Road to Hell on Mild Sauce Radio. Mild Sauce Radio, Saturday afternoon live. You know it's time for the fucking Turn the Punch Bowl and the Rock Discovery Hour with Steve Breit. We're gonna fucking freak people out with some brutal fucking hardcore today. So, I had a completely different episode scheduled for this afternoon, but my genius buddy, who I will introduce in just a few minutes, he gave a good idea this last night when we had drinking. So we're gonna throw a fucking audible in honor of the weekend. And we're going to fucking do sports talk all afternoon long. Fucking Philly Eagles, Patriots. That's what we're going to do. Deep analysis. No, I'm just kidding. But we're going to keep it on a fucking theme. And we're going to go fucking Philly, Boston hardcore in honor of the football game tomorrow afternoon. This is the Rock Discovery Show with Steve Breit, like I said. And here I am. This week, in honor of the fucking theme, I am wearing a Slapshot shirt, as you can see from the tour last year when they played. We're going to throw a fucking audible in Chicago, in honor of the weekend. And with that, we're going to jump right into the next song. It's called Battered. It's by Slipshot, and we'll come right out and jump back in. Keep it on a fucking theme, and we're going to go fucking Philly, Boston hardcore in honor of the football game tomorrow afternoon. This is the Rock Discovery Show with Steve Breit, like I said. This week, in honor of the fucking street. Hey, we're back. That last track you heard was Slapshot Batter off of LP from 1995. Like I said, Chicago Rock Discovery with Steve Breit. This is football weekend, Super Bowl weekend. So, in honor of the big game tomorrow afternoon, we're doing a special episode. It's a Philly hardcore, Boston hardcore, head-to-head matchup, just badass shit. And this is a special episode this week. I'm here with a special guest, a good friend of mine, Paul Abood. He is a somewhat East Coaster himself, and we're here to do a fucking badass show on just very cool Philly, Boston, head-to-head hardcore in honor of the Super Bowl. Welcome, Paul. How you doing?
Thanks, man. I'm good.
Honor of the game tomorrow afternoon. Excellent, excellent. And of course, as you know, with our Rock Discovery show every week, I like to try and bring in a little bit of a beer so we can do a little thematic in the vein. So this week from Victory Brewing out of Pennsylvania. Exactly, they're in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, 30 miles west of Philly. We are rocking out with the Golden Monkey, the Belgian triple. It's a fucking little bit of a hearty, heady beer for a hearty, heady show. Cheers, cheers. Excellent, excellent. And of course, with that, like I said, what we're going to be doing for the next hour is we're going to be going back and forth, playing a Philly track, playing a Boston track, kind of compare and contrast, chat about it a little bit. So the last track you heard was Boston Stalwart Brewing out of forever. You know, and then before that we had, and this is another thing, we're going to be going back and forth, old school and new school. So leading into the show, we had Top Gun by Bury Your Dead. This was a song that was recommended by Paul. They're a current underground hardcore band that's fucking rocking out. So why don't you tell us a little bit about why you thought this is a badass fucking song to lead in with? Compare and contrast.
Bury Your Dead
chat
rocks,
about it a
man.
little
They're
bit.
one of
So
my
the last
favorite
track you heard was
OG hardcore bands.
Boston
I say OG, I mean like 2002, 2003 got me into a lot of aggressive, modern,
you know, and
East
then
Coast
before that
hardcore.
we had, and
Bury Your
this is
Dead, I
another
think,
thing. We're gonna be
kind
going
of
back and forth, old
bleeds
school
over
and new
into that
school.
metalcore,
So leading into the
section
show,
of
we had
the
Top
genre,
Gun,
and really kind of
by Bury Your Dead.
They had some sort
This was a
of
song
feel
that
to
was
me, at
recommended
least.
by
I know,
Paul.
like, I
They're
think
a
Boston
current
and New York
underground
and Philly
hardcore
and all
band
those
that's
East Coast
fucking
towns, they
rocking
kind of
out. So
have
why
their
don't
own
you
vibe.
why don't you tell us a
kinda
little
have
bit
their own
about
style of
why
how
you
they
thought
play.
this was a badass fucking song?
Bury Your Dead always to me was like a band that looked good, all in their white tees, like slick back hair, but fuck, bro, they went hard, aggressive, violent, Boston to the core. That was an old song. It came off, I believe, their first or second album, Cover Your Tracks. Always one of my favorites. As a drummer, killer drum sequences, killer drumming in general.
This was a song that was recommended by Paul.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, that's awesome. And you know, this is something that I've kind of noticed over the course of this episode. And I tried when I was picking songs to be a little bit more as diverse, I suppose, as possible. But in the end of the day, I think as we go through this, you know, that East Coast hardcore, you know, style, thematic, that's just going to bleed through. This is not going to be a bouncing around to like light and heavy stuff. This is East Coast hardcore. This is fucking aggressive, loud. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That's the root
That's
of it all,
awesome. And,
man.
you know,
I mean,
this
like,
is something that I've kind of noticed over the
something
course
that
of
I
this
find so
episode.
special
I tried
about
to,
it, especially
I
when
tried
we're
when
getting
I was
Philly,
picking
Boston,
songs to
they have
be a
genres of their
little
own.
bit
It's not
more
even just like regular hardcore,
diverse,
but
I suppose,
it comes
possible,
from a
but
deeper
in the end of the day, I think as
hardcore
we go
sentiment,
through
I think,
this,
bleeding
you know,
out of New York, as you were saying,
that
it's just
East
like
Coast hardcore,
they took that style of hardcore and then
thematic,
put
that's just
Philly
going to
on
bleed
it.
through.
Yeah.
This is not going to be
Absolutely.
And you know,
this was
something I was excited about coming into this week's episode because, like, as I was looking through my library and thinking about how to, you know, craft the songs from this week's episode, I was excited that, you know, it's like a lot of times you think of East Coast hardcore, and naturally you're to New York, fucking Agnostic Front, or you know what I mean, DC with Minor Threat,
Which is good shit.
Absolutely,
That's the best shit. Yeah.
absolutely. But this was a cool challenge because it was like, no, not New York, not DC hardcore. All right, what's in the library? All right, well, digging around for some deep cuts. So that was exciting and that was fun for me.
I was excited
and to your point on that East Coast heritage, we're gonna jump into our next track, and I'm sure you love these guys. It's Kid Dynamite off of their debut album. And the cool thing about this band, and we might, depending on how long we got today, but you know, this was one of those bands where they grew out of Lifetime out of New Jersey. But this was one of those bands that just it branched out, and Kid Dynamite or Painted Black. You know, they've got such a great pedigree, and you know, it's that early 2000s, you know, post-hardcore, but still East Coast, you know, right in with jump into our that loud, proud fucking
energy.
East Coast movement. I'm sure you love these guys.
Yep.
Yeah, so why don't we jump into it? So the next track is Kid Dynamite, Pause, off their debut record. The cool thing about this band, and we might, depending on how long we got today, but you know, this was one of those bands where they grew out of life out of New Jersey, but this was one of those bands that just it branched out, and Kid Dynamite, Painted Black, you know, they've got some great pedigree, and you know, it's that early Yeah, so why don't we jump into it? So the next track is Kid Dynamite, Pause, off their debut record. So All right. Hey, we're back. That last track you heard was Kid Dynamite Pause off their debut album. And I think for the rest of the afternoon, I think we're going to jump back and forth between like, a newer track, older track, and bounce back and forth between Philly, Boston. I think this is going to be a nice pairing. So leading off with the next song, Paul, why don't you tell us why you picked the next track? It's Amur, When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong.
Damn. Amur is one of my favorites from like the early 2000s. I haven't really listened to much of their new stuff, to be honest. I don't even know what they're up to nowadays. Last thing I heard about them, they were fucking dipping into dubstep and shit, which is not necessarily my cup of tea by any means. But this song, When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong, referencing the amazing Chappelle skit, fucking hilarious.
Oh, yeah, that was a classic.
This one, it reminds me of a time where I was starting to get into more aggressive music, more violent music. I think that's something too, like something I want to get into later is the transition of violence and all that shit into music. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. But Amir, When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong, it's off their second album, I believe. Goodbye to the Gallows.
Excellent.
Very
Excellent.
heavy, very deep, bass tones, fucking like no other.
Very cool.
So
Very cool. Let's give it a check. All right, so that last track you heard was The Curse. Old School or Not, You're Still a Dick. And that was a fucking Philly hardcore from, was that early 2000s. And then before that, we heard Amur, When Keeping It Real Goes Wrong. Boston hardcore from a little bit later. And, we were just talking about that earlier. This is that neat dichotomy between, different stylistics, and you go through the years.
Right. I think, when I listen to this stuff, it's so cool to hear what kind of bleeds over from old school to new school. And it's funny because weird that song being called Old School, New School, You're Still a Dick.
Yeah.
It's true about hardcore kids too. But no, especially a dynamic when we're listening to Amir where it's a lot of slower breakdowns and, every now and then you'll get something that's a little bit upbeat, fast-paced, fast-tempo, like that the second song we listened to.
The Curse.
The Curse. It's still hardcore to me, and you still see it bleed over, and I love hearing that dynamic, that change. It's so much fun. It gets the crowd moving.
Yeah, absolutely. And, overall, I've always found it interesting being Chicago, right, being Midwest. And Paul, your background, you're from Cleveland, right? So, Midwest pride all around. But like, I've always found it interesting that like, I'm going to be honest, Chicago, Midwest, Indianapolis, Detroit, they're not necessarily leading the charge when it comes to innovative, new, aggressive styles of music. And generally speaking, it's the East Coast or the West Coast, and everything kind of bleeds toward the center.
Oh, yeah.
And I've always been struck by, with East Coast, it's that very aggressive, just no fucking around, going back to
no positivity, man. Violence,
going back
blood,
to
bloodshed.
Starting with the Ramones and then getting into Bad Brains and Agnostic Front and the Cro-Mags and just like all those.
Shout out Connecticut.
Like,
shout out Connecticut. Shout out middle of nowhere, Maine. Massachusetts, y'all go hard.
But then you go out to the West Coast and you get you're getting into like Suicidal Tendencies, Black Flag, Bad Religion, and then you get more melodic. So there's definitely a West Coast sound and an East Coast sound.
Definitely.
And this is all very East Coast, and
fuck.
Absolutely,
which is fun as fuck.
Absolutely, this is very cool.
To your point, it's so crazy, and I think we're blessed in a way to be living in a city like Chicago, be from the Midwest, where you get that kind of fucking weird mix of aggression and melody and cool shit. I know I can almost not tell nowadays whether this band's from East Coast or West Coast because so many bands relocate from the East and West and vice versa. They're combining all these styles. You hear a lot of more, dare I say, pop dip into hardcore nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Bands like Turnstile, bands like Forced Order, which are East Coast kids moving to the West Coast. It's interesting to see that dynamic. But to your point about the Midwest, I think, like I said, we're blessed in a way.
Yeah.
We get it all. We get the hardcore melting pot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I've always appreciated that about the city. And I think with that, let's jump back into some music. So we're going to bounce back into some Philly. Again, this is going back what I was talking about earlier with the dissolution of Lifetime. You had a couple of great bands jump out, and Kid Dynamite was one of them. Yeah. Another one of the fucking badass outgrowths of that fucking tremendous band. I don't know about you. I loved Lifetime.
They're fun.
This is not a Jersey episode, but
no way, but you can't forget Jersey, man. Fucking Jersey goes hard. The Banner, one of my favorite old style fucking punk bands who I don't know, they're probably still killing it today.
Yeah.
Fun as fuck. I think no, I wouldn't give up on that, man. New Jersey. Once again, like East Coast.
Yeah, so East Coast. Yeah, so the next track we're going to hear is called Painted Black, and the track is called Worms, and like I said, this was another great fucking Philly hardcore band.
We play the only part, the schemes are absurd, buy in and get burned. At day's end, we're just food for the worms, so we work on what we love, live on our own terms. And the gears still turn. Will you remain devout? Devour day in and day out. And if you have any doubts, look no further than the tune-up that's been out. They make for this warping stain. We will be the vaccine. We won't be meat for this warping scene. We will be the vaccine. We won't be meat for this warping scene. We will be the vaccine. We won't be meat for this warping scene. We will be the vaccine.
This is Mild Sauce Radio, Saturday afternoon, live. This is the football special show. So Philly hardcore, Boston hardcore, back and forth. And the last track you heard was Painted Black, Worms. I'm gonna bounce this off to Paul. Set up the next band. We're gonna hear from a track from a band called Firewalker. Why don't you tell us about them?
Get hip to Firewalker. If you're not hip to Firewalker by now, you're missing out. Female-led band, Boston, Massachusetts. Just came out with the self-titled. It's aggressive. It's melodic. It's short. It's an easy listen. It's fun. Shout out, ladies. Hardcore. Firewalker.
Let's check it out.
Dice.
All right, Mild Sauce Radio, Chicago, Saturday afternoon, live. That was Firewalker, Loaded Dice. Fucking badass hardcore. Why don't you fucking expound upon them a little bit more, man?
Dude,
I was really impressed.
You know, I got into Firewalker from another band that I'm in love with, Turnstile, out of Baltimore, Maryland, but relocated to Los Angeles, like we were talking about earlier. Firewalker is on the same label. Shout out Popwig, amazing record label out of Baltimore, I feel. Maybe Baltimore, LA. They turned me on to Firewalker's self-titled Firewalker, which came out this past summer, I believe, maybe, in 2017. Just killer energy coming out of that band, man. I had the privilege to see them at the Bottom Lounge, I think, a couple months ago.
Oh, very cool.
Someone. A lot of energy, dude. And I love seeing this, man. I love seeing the diversity in the scene. You know, I'm starting to see a lot more female-led bands, female-led, fucking people going. It's just females going to shows, like girls killing it at shows, on stage, off stage, and I don't know about you, man, but it's good to see it.
Absolutely. You know, that was something I touched upon on a couple of previous episodes where, you know, at least in the Midwest, the bands that I was most impressed upon in the last, like, say, 18 months, they're not like, you know, straight white dudes in Chicago. You know what I mean? It's bands like Udisic or bands like Tigress or,
dude,
you know,
shout out
Attaboy.
Tigress. Fucking great Chicago band.
Absolutely. You know, so it's very cool. No, I think they broke up.
Rest in peace, Tigress.
Absolutely. They fucking kicked ass. But
you kicked ass.
You know, Indiana bands like Negative Scanner, you know, these are things that are really, and it's not to say that this hasn't been the case for years now, but I think in the recent, you know, year, 2 years, you know, what's really kind of exciting me and what's really popping off and it's different, you know what I mean? Hardcore's hardcore, but you know, I'm a devotee for years, so I'm not gonna change. But it's always nice to hear fresh perspectives.
Yeah, man. I think they're like ladies, man. They're
Absolutely
lighting up the scene. They're fucking it up in a good way. Like they fuck with people's minds, man. And when you see these like girls just grabbing the mic like they're fucking born with it in their hand, it's heartwarming. Man.
Oh, it's so fucking dope, and
dope.
And I love that. The scene, the hardcore scene, you know what I mean? You're everybody's on an equal playing field, and it's not like, oh, this artist or this man or woman or whatever is like elevated to a higher level or not. You know, hardcore is fucking hardcore, and if you're fucking down with the scene and you're fucking rocking out, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or anything like that. You know, nationality, race, gender, it all fucking goes by the wayside. You know, when you've got tremendous fucking hardcore, which we're fucking rocking out to today. So I think we're gonna lead into the next couple of tracks. You know, so we're gonna start with a little bit more Boston, and this was a track that Paul had queued up, so we're going to jump into a little bit of Title Fight. So why don't you tell us about this this next track?
So Title Fight, Mrack, is actually from Pennsylvania.
Oh.
They're from Kingston, Pennsylvania, which is interesting. It's like literally right in the middle between Philly and Pittsburgh. So
okay, there we go.
They're a band, man, that has just turned into such a different band from when they started, which I think is interesting. It's them maturing. It's them changing what they like.
Yeah, their most recent record, right? They were changing up the tempos, and it wasn't the straight hardcore of their earlier stuff.
No, man, and it's interesting. A bunch of straight edge kids.
Yeah.
They rep it. One Life crew. Good for them. This sounds like a psych album. It sounds like a psychedelic. I just took acid. I'm gonna listen to hardcore, but it's like the weirdest mix of it. It's like the album Hyperview came out in I think 16, and this song Mrack I think is one of the more raging songs on the album. Definitely skews a little bit more towards their hardcore days. So yeah, let's jump into it, man.
Excellent. Let's check it out. Radio live Saturday afternoon. We're jamming out to some Philly-Boston football-themed hardcore on a fucking Saturday afternoon. Last track you heard was Cave In with Ritual Famine off the Beyond Hypothermia collection from the late 90s, collecting all their early EPs. Fucking love Cave In. They've been around. Those guys have been around for so long.
Yeah,
and,
man.
you know, again, this is that very cool intersection of like bands where one ends, another begins, and it's just that big extended hardcore family, you know.
Yeah.
With Cave In, you've got that family tree of like Cave In, Converge, Zozobra, Old Man
Dillinger
Gloom,
Escape Plan.
Dillinger Escape
Don't
Plan.
forget about them.
The whole Hydra Head world. I mean,
Cave-In.
this cracks a can of worms, but
Cave In, not to go off topic, but I guess it's on topic because this is our fucking show. We can do whatever the fuck we want. Cave In got me into the Dillinger Escape Plan, which got me into Under Oath, which got me into so much fucking good music, where I learned how to play drums, where I learned to fucking mosh. There's just so much cool shit coming out of there. But Cave In being one of those pivotal bands.
oh yeah,
That
absolutely.
sparked all that, you know.
Absolutely.
It's like post-hardcore, hardcore, screamo, aggressive, like whatever you want to call it. you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. I feel that, you know, the late 90s, early 2000s in terms of aggressive music was really owned by like that Boston crew, that East Coast crew for a long time. You know, not to give short shrift to like West Coast. I mean, like from that era, I love stuff like Botch or Blood Brothers. But you know, we're talking East Coast today, so it's back into that fucking family, and that was one of those things. So
you can't discredit. You know, we keep going back to this East Coast West Coast thing, and you can't discredit the West Coast for arguably making awesome killer hardcore music that arguably came from the East Coast. You know, I mean, I think that bands like, you know, Terror and Trash Talk, they like killed it in their own way. But I think a lot of them, one can mistake Terror for a New York band, you know, and same can be said about a lot of bands from, you know, that same area.
yeah, you know, it's close-knit DNA, but I guess, you know, that's one of those things where, like, Chicago's perspective, I could say, like, oh, yeah, you know, close-knit DNA, but, you know, you get a Philly native in here, you get a New York native here, and I'm going to get punched in the face.
Let's talk about Philly, man. Let's talk about Philly because I feel like growing up, I got into New York hardcore, I got into Boston hardcore. I think I got into Philly hardcore, but I didn't know it. You know, I didn't know whether it was a band that was from Philly. I didn't know, you know, Philly was putting out shit that was hard. Like I was, and especially from Cleveland, you get a lot of it all. And I was raised on certain hardcore that was appealed to Clevelanders or whatever. But let's talk about Philly because there's a lot of shit going on there. Right
Absolutely.
now,
And I think it's interesting for you growing up from like Cleveland. So you're a little bit closer into it. You know,
Exactly.
It's Midwest, but
Right.
it's Eastern Midwest. So
Oh, yeah.
like, does a lot of that stuff like bleed into the Cleveland scene? Let's talk about that a little bit.
I think so. And I didn't realize it. I don't think I realized it until I moved here to Chicago. Shout out Cleveland. Shout out Chicago. Amazing hardcore scenes. I don't think I noticed just how East Coast the scene was in Cleveland until I moved here. Because I think Chicago owns Midwestern hardcore. They're like, this is Midwestern hardcore. Cleveland, to your point, we get a little bit of bleed from the East Coast. We get a little bleed from the West Coast and the Midwest. So going to shows in Cleveland, and especially local shows, the Grog Shop on Coventry, Peabody's Down Under, rest in peace, which doesn't exist anymore. That's what I grew up on, amazing venues. But, dude, if we wanted to talk Cleveland hardcore, I would describe it as aggressive. I would describe it as violent, like fucking scary violent, which is cool sometimes. But and something I also noticed about Chicago, I didn't think that the scene was quite as violent as the Cleveland one. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but yeah, man. I mean, like, and I definitely think that there's a ton of Philly bleed into it. You know,
Yeah, it sounds that way. It sounds.
oh
that way.
man, and I'd love to go to Philly to see a show, man. Have you been to any shows?
You know, I gotta say I've never been to Philly, so I've never been able to experience
Same,
that
man.
scene.
I think I went to Philly when I was maybe like 8 or 9 years old. Not into hardcore just yet. I was still listening to black metal. I'm just kidding. But dude, there's like, if we're talking venues, just, you know, there's those pivotal venues and spots in Philly that are killing it right now. You know, you see the First Presbyterian Church, which is literally in a fucking basement of a church, and like, you know, that was some of my favorite YouTube videos. The sets that I watch are in this fucking church basement, and the stage is literally lined with those you know, those like foam puzzle pieces that babies put on their fucking floors. That's what this covers the stage. So, you know, people wilding out on stage, if they fall, they don't break their shit.
Absolutely.
They land on this puppy shit. But amazing venue, like, and I see like there is fucking energy in Philly. You watch a show from there, like some of the ones that stick out for me are the Code Orange set there is amazing. Turnstile sets there are amazing. I watched a fucking killer Cro-Mag set there on YouTube. This is all YouTube. I was not there, so I can't vouch for the energy in the room, but it looked like it was fucking lit. It was super cool. Not to mention, This Is Hardcore, biggest hardcore festival in the United States.
Absolutely.
Philadelphia, keeping it alive. It was fucking cool as shit, man. I'd love to go to This Is Hardcore.
Yeah,
if any
absolutely.
out there have been, lucky you. Let's fucking go, Steven. We do a show there.
Absolutely. Let's fucking hook it up. But you know, that's very cool. And to that point, why don't we jump back into some music? So I think we've heard we've been bouncing around a little bit. I think we might do a little bit more of that back and forth. So why don't we jump into Ink and Dagger? The next track we're going to hear is called Bloodlust. And
is that Philly? Is that Boston?
This is Philly.
Philly?
And
keeping it Philly.
Absolutely.
Keeping it cheesesteak. Let's go.
This is off their 1997 album, Drive This 7-Inch Steak Through My Philadelphia Heart. So it can't get much more Philly than that.
That is Philly as fuck. Throwing an Eagles and a fucking steak sandwich.
Exactly. I'm seeing green right now.
Oh my God.
Let's check it out.
Let's do it.
Oh, what I
All right, so we're back, and that last track you heard was SSD, The Kids Will Have Their Say, classic early 80s hardcore, I believe, and I'm sure the internet world can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was the first Boston straight-edge hardcore band, SSD, and then before that we had Ink and Dagger, Bloodlust. So, that was an interesting dichotomy that we've been talking about a little bit, with Ink and Dagger. That's 1997. And then SSD, that's 1981, 82. So, you're getting that differentiation, but the similarities because it's all in that East Coast family.
Right. Isn't that crazy, man? You play music on a radio show that is made almost 10, 13, 15 years made apart, and you still see the same.
Mm-hmm.
You hear aspects that ground the song in hardcore. You hear things that ground the song on East Coast hardcore. It's crazy to kind of see how the genre has progressed, but at the same time has remained the same in some aspects, whether it's to drum patterns, it's to distortion on guitar, it's to vocal techniques. Like, my God, man, it's beautiful.
Yeah. And it's that same power, that same passion, that same energy,
Right.
And that's the cool thing, whether, it's the early 80s, it's the late 90s, it's 2018, that's the beauty of hardcore, it's that visceral release. It's that fucking electric energy that I've always been drawn to.
Right. And that's something, too, I think that is special with hardcore. There's so many phases of it, so many subgenres, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fucking, melting pot of a genre. So much good pop punk, post-hardcore, screamo you could throw in there, It's probably crazy for you seeing shows like in the 90s, seeing shows today. I started seeing hardcore shows around 2004, 2005. Steve has seen them for a little bit longer than I. It's probably cool seeing it progress, to some extent.
It's super cool, and I just love the energy and just the passion. You know what I mean? Where bands can come and go and stylistics can come and go, but there's just honesty to hardcore, and it's something that you see with certain genres and certain, unlike others, there's some that like rise and fall and die by the wayside, or you look at like metal and it kind of ebbs and flows, and it's it's power. Once pop music or other genres start like beating it down, it just distills down into its core roots, and then it comes back springing up later. And hardcore is another one of those genres.
Right. Well, I mean, I want to talk about that more because to me, as someone who was maybe in the scene at a different time than a lot of people, like, dude, I see kids half my age going to shows now, and I'm like, fuck yeah, let's keep it hardcore alive.
Yeah.
It's moving it to the next phase. It's keeping it alive. I love that, and I love seeing it, especially like it's wherever I go. To the viewers out there, Steve and I got to catch a pretty fucking weird punk show in Toronto.
Yeah. Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
A couple months ago, I believe the headliner was Pantychrist.
Yeah, it was Pantychrist and the Black Donnelly. And again, going back into the dichotomy of new versus old, Black Donnelly is early Canadian hardcore, early
Canada.
80s.
Shout out Canada.
And then
Fucking
Pantychrist
hardcore as
is
shit.
Current Toronto hardcore.
Pantychrist, though, and we are just getting way out of the East Coast, West Coast thing. Pantychrist, but I have to say this, though, because Pantychrist, we learned post-show that the lead singer fucking went to jail for killing someone or some shit.
So there was,
it doesn't get much hardcore than that, ladies and gentlemen. Literally killing someone.
So we had come into town, and we were there for different purposes, and we're looking for something to do for the night, and we caught this flyer at a record shop, and it's like, oh, Pantychrist, that sounds pretty cool. Let's go check it out. So we went and saw the show. It was a great night. And the next day, we were kind of like mentioning it, like, oh yeah, we went out to a show last night. Oh, who'd you go see? Pantychrist, and we get like,
wait, where did we go to?
It was Coalition.
Coalition was the venue,
downtown
right?
Toronto.
Yeah,
and great venue. I mean, like everything was cool and all.
Yeah.
But like we were getting the weirdest stink eye from like everybody that like the topic came up to, and all these local Toronto guys were like, "Oh, I can't believe that show got put on." I can't believe you guys went, and stupid Americans. We're like, what? Punk. I mean, we're going out checking shit out, and it turned out there was a lawsuit, and and there was a drug deal gone bad or something like that, and the singer had just gotten out of prison.
Right.
It was Accessory. I don't
Accessory.
think
she didn't physically slay someone herself, but she was part of it.
But
it was, not to put him on blast, it was a fucking dope show.
No, it was a dope show.
It was a lot of crazy people jumping around. Canadians. Whoever says Canadians are calm, cool, and collected, bullshit. They've never seen Canadians at a fucking Panty Christ show.
No.
That shit was intense, man.
That was fucking
Canadians
raw.
go hard.
They do.
Canadians go hard. And I want to see more fucking Canadian shows now, man. Like a Canadian fucking punk, Canadian hardcore.
Absolutely. Let's fucking table that for another episode and get back into the theme that we're going for today. So let's jump into some more music.
Reel back. Back in the East Coast.
Reel it back. So the next track we're going to hear, this is an interesting band. They're called Deep Wound. They're out of Boston.
Classics.
Early hardcore. The track we're going to hear, appropriately enough, is called Patriots. We're going to check this out.
And I hope they don't win the fucking I don't really give a fuck about the Super Bowl, to be honest. But, you know.
Yeah, us Midwesterners. I don't know about you, but like my football season, I stopped caring like when my last fantasy team lost for the season. So.
And there's a reason why I'm not wearing a fucking Cleveland Browns hat. That's for sure.
Yeah. Hope springs eternal for Midwest loser teams like the Browns and the Bears. Maybe next year. There's always
honorable mention: Chicago Bears, Cleveland Browns. Super Bowl 2018 or 19. Let's go.
From worst to first.
Battle of the losers. Fucking halftime show, all hardcore.
But yeah, speaking of hardcore, let's check out some hardcore.
Let's do it. Do we need another?
Oh, this is
I just hit the wrong button.
Oh, okay.
I'm trying. Hey, we're back. So the last couple tracks we heard, we saw Patriots by Deep Wound. That was the last track we heard. And then before that, we heard Never Met the Gooch by Kid Dynamite. I wanted to jump in and especially call out that last song that we heard, Deep Wound. You know, that's a deep cut fucking Boston hardcore band. But for people that are into the music scene, into that alternative scene, people might recognize some of the players in that band. They put out a couple records, broke up, and then after that, Lou Barlow and Jay Mascis of Deep Wound cut out of that band and formed a little group called Dinosaur Jr., which went on to be a big alternative darling.
Never heard of him. Dinosaur Jr., man. fucking great band.
Yeah, and as you heard, like
Primus a lot all the time too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cross genre.
I mean, they owned, to me, Dinosaur Jr. owned like the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s,
Right.
that whole alternative scene, you know,
Right,
they were
right.
they were like consummate professionals. And I think it's interesting to check out that how they went from that very, you know, structured, technically proficient, you know, rock alternative sound from what we just heard, which was raw as fuck. Early
Hardcore kids at heart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
I love when you get bands like that where there's that awesome pedigree in that, you know, it may not be what they're doing today, but that they were hardcore kids, you know.
Right. I mean, like prime example with the dudes from Dinosaur Jr., but like even bands that they're playing with, Primus, definitely had some hardcore undertones in their first couple albums. Like Punk Kids, California, is that San Francisco?
Yeah, San Francisco.
Yeah. What's the scene like out there, man? Like fucking kids, weird, you know. It's like the Grateful Dead meets any sort of hardcore. Like, what the fuck do you get out of that?
Yeah. You go sturgeon fishing in the bay or something. But before that, again, we're back into that family tree of the Philly hardcore roots with some Kid Dynamite, and it's that fucking just rocking raw fucking East Coast hardcore.
Patriots. Fucking Patriots, man. Why do you think they named? Is it that song? How long was that song? Like
that song was
seconds.
20 some seconds.
20 some seconds, dude. But that style of hardcore, just that fast. It's almost like the just chaos and like as much chaos as you can fit into like a 30-second song or whatever. That fast, like is that the monkey beats? I think is what they're called. For a fucking reason. Look at the drummer when he's fucking playing them. That style you see bled over a ton of bands nowadays.
Oh yeah, I mean like you think about it, and that Deep Wound track was, I believe, 81 or 82, and this is getting
hardcore.
into hardcore early days, but you're getting into the birth of grind and crossover and thrash and you know what I mean. Like this is spreading out like a virus coming from that East Coast vibe, and you're getting down into Texas, and like it's bleeding into bands like DRI, and you're going out West Coast 100%. With bands like Black Flag.
Oh yeah, Black Flag, Ceremony. Even you see it's just like you don't really know what they're saying, but you feel the energy and you feel the aggression. You feel the emotion without being emotional, you know what I'm saying? Like,
absolutely,
it's energy.
It's raw nerve. You know, no compromise.
I mean, dude, like one of my favorite bands today, Trash Talk. Shout out Trash Talk. You're not from Philly or New York or Boston or any East Coast, but you're fucking cool as shit. Like I think they adopted that sound, turning it into their own, coming from Philly. Yeah, you know, like coming from Boston. That speed, that energy, it just bled over fucking miles to the West Coast. Cool if you ask me.
Yeah. So let's play a little bit more music. So I think we're gonna dive into a track by it's Siege. Siege is let me refer to my notes. Siege, Boston, 1984, Weymouth, Massachusetts. So you're getting a little bit outside of town, but you know it's the New England Patriots.
Honorable mention, and I think that's actually an interesting point. It's like these genres in Philly and these bands in Philly, these bands in Boston. They didn't just remain in Boston. When you think of Boston hardcore, you think of Worcester, Massachusetts as well. You think of Salem, Massachusetts. You think of so many different little hubs. Yeah. For hardcore that aren't in a major city.
Absolutely.
You know?
And I don't know about you, but I felt there was a little bit of difficulty when I was like compiling my tracks, because like obviously Philly is Philly and you can 100%. Hit the Philly suburbs and stuff, but you say New England, and just from a music lover's perspective, you're like looking at all your cool fucking favorite bands that you want to fucking play out on a Saturday afternoon, fucking live on Mild Sauce Radio. But
shout out Mild Sauce, shout out fucking Golden Monkey.
What?
So much love.
But no,
You
like
make a good point.
but like it was tough for me because I'm like, how far do you stretch it out? Because
Right.
I'm looking at like New England, so it's
Right,
not necessarily
right.
Massachusetts. It might be a little bit of Connecticut, you know. And I restrained myself. I wanted to throw some downtown boys in there from fucking Connecticut. But like, you know, I'm trying to keep it a little bit tighter in because you could easily like, you know, lose yourself because there's so much cool shit out there. And like, so
Right.
I was definitely
I mean-
keeping it like Westfield, Weymouth, Salem,
Right.
Boston.
I mean, dude, we were listening to Title Fight earlier, not a Philly band, killer Pennsylvania band.
Yeah.
You know, Kingston, Pennsylvania, halfway between Pittsburgh and Philly. And then once you start to get in that Pittsburgh realm, it's a whole different ballgame. You know, it's a whole different style of hardcore. And then as, you know, if we're talking those straight, like we're talking Pennsylvania or we're talking Massachusetts, you can't forget bands like Converge.
Oh, no,
You can't forget bands of that realm that I'm sure we're in the Boston scene at times. I mean, how can you dodge a city like that?
Yeah.
You know, how can you dodge a style like that, a genre like that has a city that has its own style of hardcore? Literally. Like,
And I struggled because, you know, my music tastes, you know, as you've seen on the show in the past episodes, it's all over the map. So like I'm not just hardcore, I'm not just metal, I'm not just, you know what I mean? Like I'm checking out new shit. And personally, as I was going through like last night, because this was an audible, so like last night I'm home and I'm like digging through my library and like looking for tracks and, you know, trying to craft what we're going to talk about today. And I had to really restrain myself because, you know, there's the hardcore, which we're kind of talking about today, but then there's that blurry gray area of post-hardcore and then what happens post-hardcore and the deconstruction of those styles to where, you know, as you said, Converge. And what I was talking about with
Fucking
Cave In
Converge,
and the
man.
evolution, Cave In, Converge, Coalesce.
That's family, man. That's a genre in itself.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we might be
Pioneers.
able to do an entire episode just on that kind of Hydra Head family tree. But like I had to really constrain myself. Like I wanted to throw in some like, you know, some Zozobra or, you know what I mean? Like, how can I work in some ISIS? But that gets into like metal and other genres. But it's still that aggression and that evolution of aggression and the hardcore ethos as it bleeds out into other genres through that music spectrum.
Very important. Dude, if you're talking about that it's shout out Boston, another pioneers in another genre. You talk hardcore, you think you're talking like these mix and melodies, you're talking about fucking you can't forget pop punk. You can't forget pop hardcore.
Yeah.
Bands that are coming out of Boston, especially like bands like 4 Year Strong, like who have those hardcore mentalities, those hardcore roots, but they tweak it a little bit.
Yeah.
Turn it into pop punk, that's a Boston genre, man. Like it's not to mention Irish hardcore, Irish pop punk, Irish punk, like that's a thing in itself too. Birthed out of Boston.
Absolutely.
It's a beautiful thing.
And you know, I felt that it would be a little ham-fisted to throw some Dropkick Murphys in there, but honestly though, like
Honorable
mad
mention.
shout outs, honorable mention.
Shout out fucking drunk punk.
Exactly.
That's drunk punk.
Drunk Irish punk.
That's started another fucking thing, man. That's like adding a whole another spice to that. That's wild, man.
Yeah,
I didn't even
and,
think
you know,
about that.
bringing it around to a Chicago connection, you know, like just like Dropkick Murphys are doing out on the East Coast,
Dropkick
Tossers down on the
Murphys.
South Side,
The
fucking
Tossers.
local Chicago shit. little extra credits shout out to Chicago connections.
Let your nationality shine
Yeah.
through the music you make. Pretty fucking cool. Pretty fucking Boston, if you ask me.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think of
Boston
that shit.
pride.
I think of that opening scene to the Departed.
Yeah.
With the shout out Dropkick Murphys. Should we listen to some music?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump back into some tracks. What did we play last? Did we do Siege Drop
We
Dead?
played some good Boston last. Yeah.
All right. Why don't we check out? Damn, we're running through
should
all these
listen to
songs.
the band
Punk
Boston.
music goes fast, so let's check out some SSD, some Boston hardcore with Jock Itch, and this is off their "The Kids Will Have Their Say" LP from 1982.
Great fucking record, man.
Absolutely.
Amazing
Defining,
fucking record.
genre-defining, early fucking straight-edge hardcore. I mean, these guys were respected by Minor Threat and Ian McKay and Discord Records. And
I'm glad you said straight edge because that's especially in the East Coast, man. That's like ride or die.
Yeah.
That's a genre. Yet again, another genre of hardcore. How many times are we gonna say it?
Yeah.
Like you have fucking Irish, you have pop hardcore, straight edge hardcore. Arguably came out of Boston, came out of New York, came out of the East Coast.
yeah, definitely East Coast.
Oh
you
my
know.
God, you see it in Philly all the time. You see it in Boston most of the time. It's insane, man. But
Yeah,
dude,
yeah, I mean-
killer record. Like,
Absolutely. You know, growing up for me, you know, obviously we're drinking here, so we're not following that
we're
straight
not
edge
straight
ethos.
edge, but
But much
respect to
love.
the straight- one life, one chance. One life, one chance. Much respect. Not my style. Not Steven's style. But we fuck with you.
But, you know, I grew up listening to fucking, you know, Minor Threat and Youth of Today.
Dude, Black
and
Flag,
SSD is like
it's-
right in with that, you know.
It's all love. Like,
Yeah.
it's good stuff.
Yeah, so on that note, let's jump into some SSD with Jock Itch. We're back, Mild Sauce Live on a Saturday afternoon, fucking listening to some crazy hardcore.
Getting saucy.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're getting pretty spicy.
It's kind of hot.
This isn't that mild anymore. Yeah, it's kind of hot. Mild sauce. It's kind of hot.
Fuck yeah. So, fucking, we checked out a few Boston, Philly fucking hardcore songs, bouncing around, new, old. You know, the first track we heard was SSD Jock Itch off of their The Kids Will Have Their Say LP from 1982. Then we jumped into Cave In, Retina Sees Rewind, which is off their Planets of Old EP, which, if I'm not mistaken, was around 2009. And then we heard Angry Mob Justice from Acacia Strain, some new school hardcore. So that was a nice
Boston.
Absolutely, and that was a nice little journey from, like, you know, the roots of hardcore into what the fuck's going on right now.
What the fuck is going on right now, dude?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So fill us in a little bit on what Acacia Strain is doing.
Dude, you know what? Acacia Strain is weird. They're weird to me because when I started seeing the Acacia Strain back in 2007, which I believe The Dead Walk, which was the album that the last song we listened to was also off of, I believe came out around 2007.
Okay.
Very heavy, very violent, very straight edge, very Boston, like, and in the best way possible. You know, it's you know, like we were talking about earlier. It's just the energy, it's the violence, it's the power that Boston has, and it's a weird kind of mix of straight edge hardcore mixed with like fucking heavy metal, man. And I'm talking heavy metal in the sense that it's just like breakdown. It's movement. It's no one in this crowd is still, or they're probably gonna get hit. Yeah, in the best way possible, you know. And dude, it's fun. Like, I love that shit.
You know, it's so interesting to me how the genres, you know, they were in their own worlds, and you had metal and you had, you know, speed metal and all that back in the day, and then you had hardcore, and then it was, you know, that starting to intermingle. You know, you had that crossover thrash with like DRI, like I said before, or like
DRI, man. Honorable mention. another honorable mention. East Coast. Let's fucking go.
Absolutely. And it was funny because, like I said, like, this was a fun challenge to have to try and craft a set list for today. And at one point last night, I was trying to put it together, and at some point I was like, is there a way I could string a narrative of like East Coast hardcore bleeds into Texas just as an excuse to play some DRI?
Yeah, definitely.
But, you know, my greater point, though, is like with DRI, with Stormtroopers of Death. Again, all this like East Coast.
Where's Stormtroopers of Death from?
Stormtroopers, if I'm not mistaken, you know, because it was an Anthrax side project with guitarist Scott Ian and drummer Joey Bennett, and then it was Scott Wilker from Celtic Frost and Billy Milano, who was not in a previous band, but I believe they were New York hardcore. So again, it's that East Coast vibe, but it's that evolution and expansion, and, you know, the merging of metal, the merging of hardcore, that thrash.
Right.
And you see it a lot epitomized in that East Coast style, to where, you know, it started as two separate things, then it kind of blurred together. Then in the 90s, you know, it kind of like breaks apart again. But then, like, by the time you get to the early 2000s, it comes back together with post-hardcore and metalcore. And, you know, just that intermingling and that intertwining is so cool.
Intermingling is a good word, because I think something that I love about a lot of those bands, including dude, like a lot of the bands we listen to today, it's just a great combination of metal. It's hardcore. It's a metally of heavy music that appeals to all. And I think that a lot of, and I'm totally maybe like just getting sentimental over this because I love when bands tour with other bands who don't sound anything like them.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big movement towards today where bands are touring with, metal bands are touring with hardcore bands are touring with punk bands, strict punk bands, and vice versa. I think we were talking about the other day the upcoming Power Trip show with bands like Sheer Mag and Red Death that are so different than fucking, it's cross genre. For lack of a better term, and I feel like we've been covering a lot of good bands like that today.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I think we're kind of getting close to the end of our sessions this afternoon, and I think, you know, to that point, and I definitely want to thank you for coming in. You know, this has been a great fucking afternoon talking fucking badass music, and I think I'm gonna leave it to you to do our sign-off song, and if I'm not mistaken, you're going to play some more of Acacia Strain. So we're going to end it on a high note with new fucking hardcore. And why don't you just fill us in a little bit on this?
Acacia Strain, you guys heard it. It's Boston. It's straight edge. It's loud. It's aggressive. It's violent. It's fun. Good, wholesome, clean, family fun, right? I think we're about to put on Whoa, Shut It Down, which is fitting because it's the end of the show.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be signing off on a high note, like you said.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, again, fucking rocking out on Mild Sauce Radio.
Shout out hardcore on the East Coast. Shout out Boston hardcore. Shout out fucking Philly hardcore.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shout out Super Bowl, whatever the fuck.
And fucking, as always, major props to Jay Krez, our fucking producer today, running the boards.
Shout out Mild Sauce. It's been very, very fun. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then we'll be back next week with some more fucking rockin' music. But right now, we're going to end the afternoon of heaviness on Acacia Strain and go Philly. Fuck Boston. Mild Sauce.
Operation poke 'em where his limbs at. Any rapper dead or alive, they can get that. Disrespectful little nigga, please don't get your kid smacked. Or your arm, legs mismatched, crisscross body bag. Did I go dismiss that? Never ever been the one to party clown with. Relaxing with my crown's tipped and my crown sip. King Dilla. Nigga. Cause I love how all these niggas be hating me. And I can do all things through Hennessy that strengthens me. Yeah.